Why do we all still know names like Marilyn Monroe, Joan Crawford, and Audrey Hepburn, even if we may have never seen any of their movies before? Old Hollywood stars continue to have a grasp on society to this day, even though many of them have since passed on, transcending pure fame and amassing a cult-like status. But why exactly is that? And what is so different about the Hollywood that we know today and that of the Golden Age? At the height of Hollywood's Golden Age, it produced between 400 and 500 movies a year. This was primarily produced by the 5 major studios at the time. This included Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Fox, and RKO. All of the studios were vertically integrated, meaning that every aspect of the filmmaking was done in-house. This included production, distribution, and exhibition. This meant that all actors, actresses, directors, editors, set designers, seamstresses, and so on and so forth, were all under contract at a particular studio, with the studios even owning the movie theaters where the movies were ultimately shown. Being an actor or an actress at this point in time looked very different from the job we know today. Performers were under grueling contracts that forced them to churn out a set amount of movies, normally in the span of 7 years, for many averaging 1 film every 2 to 3 months, with the studios having full control over their performers, controlling the roles they were given, whether or not they would be allowed to be loaned out to another studio, and not to mention their whole public persona. The movies at the time were star-driven, meaning that the audience went to watch it for the names on the marquee, whereas today many of us are open to watching films with lesser-known stars, simply because the film looks interesting or the plot looks compelling. Things worked a little bit differently in Old Hollywood. In order for a film to be successful, it needed star power. And in order for a studio to be successful, it needed lots of successful films, causing the studios at the time to become star-making factories. They had A-list stars, B-list stars, child stars, western stars, and even dog stars. And waiting in the wings were the newcomers, ready to take their places at the first signs of them becoming uncooperative or losing favor with the public. Janine Basinger, author of The Star Machine, said the following: "Some people refer to the Star Machine as a very sophisticated slave system. Stars were truly owned by studios. They did not make decisions about what films they were in and what roles they would play. They worked long days from 6 a.m. 6 days a week. If they weren't being filmed on the set, they had to do interviews, pose for promotional photos, take lessons in acting and diction and manners, and do costume fittings for their next assignment. Actors had to start out at the bottom, working their way up the ladder. They were tried out in various movies to see how the public reacted. Cary Grant, for example, made 24 films with Paramount between 1932 and 1936, and only received star recognition by 1937. That's a whole lot of movies. The star system heavily depended on finding the actor's type, helping them to become instantly recognizable, but essentially meant that they played the same role film to film, hindering their artistic growth, since they were basically stuck in the box of the studio's making. A great example of this would be Marilyn Monroe, who was always typecast as the pretty dumb blonde. And although she was great in that role, it was something that personally really bothered her, as no one seemed to be taking her seriously as an actress. But how did it get to this point, with studios essentially owning their stars while continuing to churn out more and more behind the scenes to replace them at any given moment? It all started in the 1900s, when people started flocking to the West in order to escape Thomas Edison's patents in the East. One small little desert town became the place to make movies, seemingly overnight. And by 1918, 80% of all films were being made in California. At the time, there was no such thing as movie stars, with movie actors simply seen as actors who were not good enough for theatre, which was long held as the more serious art form between the two. But by 1910, that started to change, when the studios realized that they could get more people to come watch the movies if they were coming to see someone specific. This gave rise to the star system we now know. Studios quickly realized the benefits of locking in stars for 7-year contracts, ensuring not only work for struggling actors at a trying financial times, but ensuring an audience in their seats of the movie theaters every week. It didn't take long for scandal to ensue, and by 1921 we heard of the first major drama in the media. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was one of the highest paid actors at the time. The story goes a little like this. Arbuckle hosted a wild party which ended up with him and actress Virginia Rappe alone in his hotel room. Soon after, she tragically fell ill and died. This led to vicious rumors that Arbuckle had raped and killed her. Found guilty in the court of public opinion, the studio did their best to distance themselves from the star. Soon after, Universal was the first studio to issue a morality clause, and other studios were quick to follow. The morality clause stated, "The actor or actress agrees to conduct himself or herself with due regard to public conventions and morals and agrees that he or she will not do or commit anything tending to degrade him or her in society or bring him or her into public hatred, contempt, scorn, or ridicule, tending to shock, insult, or offend the community or outrage public morals or decency, or tending to the prejudice of the Universal Film Manufacturing Company or the motion picture industry." That is a very long sentence. It goes on. "In the event that the actor or actress violates any term or provision of this paragraph, then the Universal Film Manufacturing Company has the right to cancel and annul this contract by giving 5 days notice to the actor or actress of its intentions to do so." As I'm sure you may have noticed, this clause was intentionally kept extremely vague. This clause would essentially include anything that brought the stars or the studios into bad light. This was the start of the controlling studio presence over the actors. The performers were no longer just workers under contract at a company. This essentially meant that the studios were given complete control over the stars' carefully crafted public personas. And if they chose not to comply, they would either be released from their contracts after being publicly slandered, or would be forced to face lawsuits for breaching their contracts. This does not mean that performers simply took this laying down. Several women played crucial roles in forming the first cracks in the facade that ultimately led to the downfall of the studio system. Let's set the scene. The decade is the 1930s. The Great Depression has swept the American nation. Unemployment has skyrocketed, and the general glitz and glamour of the roaring 20s has faded into the background. Morale was low, but luckily the public had one thing to distract them: movies. The film industry was one of the only industries at the time that seemed not to have taken a financial hit. For a quarter, the audience could spend the entire day at the cinema, watching a series of A-list movies and B-list movies and whatever else was showing, quickly becoming an escape for thousands who now had more time than ever on their hands. The studio quickly realized that and leaned into it, producing more films than ever before. And by 1935, the first movie was released in Technicolor, bridging the distance between the audience and the stars even further. The increase in production also meant that performers were being worked harder and harder than ever before, with studios looming over them, watching their every move. In comes Bette Davis in 1936. Bette Davis was known for playing more villainous and risque roles, something the studio did not like, as they continued to pawn her off for more ditzy, light-hearted roles, more befitting a beautiful woman. She did not like this one bit and continued to fight for more meaty roles. Not only that, but she had a serious problem with the fact that men were being paid much more than her, even if it was her name on the marquee. And side note, I find it very sad that this was almost 100 years ago, and this continues to be a problem in society to this day. So I have a lot of admiration for the fact that she not only stood up for herself, but all women in her industry, demanding equal pay at a time in history where society looked down on any woman who seemed to have her own opinions. This bothered her so much, in fact, that she decided to take Warner Brothers to court. She also cited her problems over the morality clause. Not only was this clause hanging over all performers at the time, but what ended up happening was the studios used this as an excuse to suspend the performers' contracts anytime they wished. The time that the studios suspended their contracts was simply added on at the back, meaning that if an actor was suspended for 6 months, Their contract now lasted up to 7.5 years, with this being used as a way to trap performers into their contracts for far longer than what was initially agreed upon. Although the lawsuit did not help Bette Davis get out of her contract with Warner Brothers, or help with the never-ending issue of the gender pay gap, it did help to shed some light on the controlling contracts these stars were under. And I do have a little quote here. It was reported that not only did outside counsel advise Warner Brothers that Clause 23 violated public policy to such a degree that counsel did not want to defend it in court, but Warner Brothers' general counsel also considered changing the contract, the cudgel of the SAR system altogether. And I personally find it hilarious that Warner Brothers' own legal team looked at their contracts, and especially at this suspension loophole in the morality clause, and came to the conclusion that it was so insulting, they personally did not want to defend it in court. So instead of doing anything about it, it just stayed like that. Right up until we experienced the wrath of another woman scorned. Now we have the 1940s, and while the Second World War started in 1939, America ended up joining the war in 1941, and Hollywood still continued to crank out movies like crazy. This is not unexpected, as by now we have learned that in times of crises, the public loves to turn to movies as a form of escape, much like today. I'm watching more movies than ever. Although the landscape of the film industry looked a lot differently than decades of the past or even of the future, a lot of the famous male actors were offered war, giving rise to newer stars as well as causing women's films to be more popular than ever. Now, if you're unfamiliar with women's films, it is a genre of film that included woman-centered narratives, female protagonists, and designed to appeal to a primarily female audience. Essentially the precursor to chick flicks, as we now know them. These films dealt mainly with themes stereotypical of women, such as domestic life, raising children, and self-sacrifice. So even though more women than ever were going to the movies, with their husbands offered war, and the popular films at the time were very female-centered, you guessed it, female movie stars were still receiving less pay than that of their male counterparts, who often had smaller, less important roles in the movies than them. As you can imagine, female stars were not too happy about that, and coupling that with the suspension clauses that were still in place in their contracts, oftentimes trapping them in a sort of limbo at their studios with no end in sight, you have the perfect recipe for drama. One woman who was especially upset by this was Olivia de Havilland. Known for her role as Melanie in Gone with the Wind when she was loaned out by Warner Brothers, she was another victim of the typecasting system. She was seen playing the same role over and over again of the damsel in distress, often opposite the exact same co-star, Errol Flynn. She felt stunted as an artist for the lack of diversity in her roles. She felt betrayed as a woman for receiving unequal pay. And she felt trapped in her contract when she was once again suspended by Warner Brothers. This led her to taking Warner Brothers to court in 1944, exactly as Bette Davis had done a decade earlier. Except this time, she won, ensuring a win for all performers who were finally out of the limbo at their contracts. Finally meaning that a 7-year contract would actually mean 7 years and not possibly 8 or 10. Although the issue of equal pay continued to be exactly that, an issue. These two lawsuits resulted in the major cracks that started to form in the studio system and ultimately led to its downfall in 1948, when more and more actors started going independent, meaning that they theoretically had more control over their choice of roles and often received a percentage of the profits of the film instead of being paid week by week as they did with the studios. And I do say that they theoretically had more control over their choice of roles for a reason. Because as much as they had an increase in autonomy over their careers, Hollywood was and continues to still be a machine, with not only films but stars themselves being the products. something available to the audience for mass consumption. As much as we as the audience have become used to big stars playing a variety of different roles and being seen in different genres, the landscaping of filmmaking continued to be much different up to the 1960s compared to today. Not to say that typecasting is not prevalent anymore today, because it certainly is, but is not at all comparable to that of old Hollywood, when the roles that actors played on screen was seen as an extension of themselves instead of a mere role. I do think that the big shift in how we see actors, especially in recent eras, is in large part due to social media. Stars have become accessible to us at the swipe of a finger, whereas the 60s brought them into our homes through the TV, slowly leading to the fading effect of the ethereal star quality. Social media has shattered the remnants of that illusion forever. Stars are no longer ephemeral beings that grace the silver screens. They are real people. Real people who often post really shitty things online, have questionable opinions, and do questionable things. Couple that with the fact that in today's day and age, literally anyone is able to get famous online, and suddenly star quality is not what it used to be anymore. But what exactly went into manufacturing these stars? What happened to take them from being some country bumpkin with dreams of being on the big screen to the instantly recognizable icons we know today? Join me in our next video where we're going to be taking a look at the transformative process that happened behind the scenes, from acting lessons to costume design and the birth of makeup as we know it today. But if you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe if you want to see any of my other videos. I also do like film and style analyses on this channel, so check that out if you're interested. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, great day. And yeah, bye-bye.